Alright YouTube, so we are back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we're kind of continuing the discussion of some of the stuff we're anticipating when it comes to Remake Part 2. This time, of course, we are discussing bosses. Now, similar to the last couple videos, we are setting ourselves a limit of the end of Disc 1. So, outside of Midgar, technically Calm, I guess, when it comes to Part 2, because it looks like our character's already at Calm. So from like Calm to the end of Disc 1, when it comes to the original game, that's where we're setting the limit of the bosses that we're anticipating, just because there's not really any point in talking about like bosses that are going to be so much further down the road, because we don't even know when Part 2 is coming out. Potentially 2023, right? Like the earliest, that seems the most feasible, the most reasonable, and we're not going to get the rest of the Final Fantasy VII story with the next game. So if we're talking about like the weapon enemies, for example, highly looking forward to this, right? These are some of the most anticipated enemies from Final Fantasy VII. I really want to see them. But they're most likely going to be with the third game or beyond. If there's 4 games, maybe they could be as far as the 4th game. And that's a lot of years down the road. So as much as I'm looking forward to them, there's not really a point in talking about it, if that makes any sense. At least not as of right now. We could do a video like that at some point where we just talk about overall the bosses from Final Fantasy VII that I'm looking forward to. But to be honest, there's not really a whole lot in this game, at least not as much as it seems. So for example, right here is like the full list of the bosses from Final Fantasy VII. Now if you count it all, there's 59 here. And at first that does seem like a lot, and it is a pretty decent number, but if you actually start breaking down the list, it's not as much as it seems. Because, for example, there's carry armor on this list, but there's also his left and right arm. And then there's the Hojo fight you do, I think in Disc 2, at the end of Disc 2, if I'm not mistaken, where you fight Hojo in a couple different phases, but then one of the Hojo forms like has his left and right arm as well. And then you have stuff like Reno, but also the pyramids that he makes, Bottom Swell, but also the water polos that he makes. And then you have the bullshit bosses in the game, like Grandhorn at the top of Fort Condor, and then like the bullshit bosses, so to speak, that Yuffie fights in the Wutai Village and the Pagoda Tower. The point of all this is when you get rid of the bloat on this list, the bullshit bosses, the pieces of bosses, the little minions or enemies that bosses add to a fight, you get rid of like the enemies and bosses that we already fought in Remake Part 1, and then you also limit us to like the end of Disc 1. There's not really a whole lot to choose from here, to where it's a lot of these on this list are probably going to be relatively obvious. But with that out of the way, let's hop right into it. And right out the gate, the very first one on this video, I'm going to cheat a little bit, because I'm going to do the dragon enemy, which is not a boss. This is a random encounter in Mount the Bell. It's a normal enemy you can fight all the time, but with the Calm flashback fight, it puts it over almost like a boss. Now, more so, this is actually that Cloud is weak, and Sephiroth obviously decimates this thing. It's not really strong in comparison to Sephiroth, but still, it's almost like it's a boss fight. I want to put it on here to have some variety, but also mostly because I'm looking forward to this segment. I can't wait to see this shit happen with Remake. I want to see Sephiroth absolutely just decimate this dragon. I want him to cut it in half. But also, a lot of us are looking forward to this segment because we're wondering if it's going to actually allow us to control Sephiroth, because that would be fucking cool. And this is completely separate from the video. I was just thinking about it while recording. It's burning in my mind, so I got to put it in this video. For you lore guys out there that know the lore of Final Fantasy VII, with this fight right here, since Cloud's memories are faulty at this point in the game, he's misremembering the events of the Nibelheim incident, who is canonically supposed to be fighting this dragon alongside Sephiroth? Is it actually Cloud, that's why he gets decimated, or is it supposed to be Zack? Because I don't believe this fight's in Crisis Core, if I remember correctly. But also, Zack, at the point of the Nibelheim incident, is a pretty strong character, so he shouldn't get decimated by the dragon. So, who is that supposed to be? Moving on from there, more or less in order, actually, is the Midgar Zolom. This is one a lot of us are anticipating as well, because it's pretty iconic. Even though it's not that hard of a fight if you're prepared for it, depending on when you go into this fight, it can be a pretty hard boss fight. It's also something you can fight over and over again, which somewhat makes it not necessarily a boss fight as well, especially later on in the game. Like, you're just going to decimate this thing. But I'm also looking forward to it because, for one, it's iconic status, but is it going to be a mandatory fight? Is it going to be optional like it is in the original game? Can you avoid it? Can you get a chocobo and like get past this thing and not have to fight it, maybe come back to it later on? Or are they going to turn this like part of the world map into an actual like marshy, swampy location, and you have this giant snake chasing you around the whole time, and maybe it chases you around for the whole chapter, you fight at the end of the chapter? I don't know. I'm very curious how they're going to handle it. Now this next one we're going to do a bit of speculation, but I think it's pretty safe speculation, because in the Mythril mine, after the Midgar Zolom, we run into the Turks at the end, run into Rude, and of course Elena. And I believe this is our first look at Elena, if I'm not mistaken, right? You guys can correct me on that. And there's a bunch of Elena stands out there that wanted to see it in Remake. We haven't seen it in Remake yet, so assuming that it plays out similarly, this will be our first look at Elena. And similar to Remake, when our first run-ins with Reno and Rude resulted in boss fights, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're at least going to fight Elena, potentially Elena and Rude together. Also on top of it, even though you're coming off the back of the Midgar Zolom, if you chose to fight them, Mythril Mine is kind of a weird location because it's only a couple of like load screens, right? It's like 3 or so rooms, and there's no bosses. You just kind of pass through it randomly on your way to Junon, and it's kind of like a bullshit location for the most part. It's kind of weird that even in the original game, We didn't fight the Turks here, so I could definitely see there being a boss fight here, and I assume it's got to be against the Turks, specifically, again, Elena. Now, next up on this list, so to speak, I guess, but it's not really a list, we're not doing it in any particular order. We're going to jump forward to a later part of Disc 1, past where I think Game 2 is going to go to, but still in Disc 1. And it's Temple of the Ancients, and it's Demon's Gate. Now, this is one I've seen somebody mention, I believe, on maybe the enemies video I did a couple days back or whatever. This is a really cool enemy design. I've always loved these like wall-based enemies. You see them in other Final Fantasy games. And at this point in the game, when you get to Temple of the Ancients, you fight Demon's Gate. Like, this is probably the hardest boss fight up to this point. You fight Red Dragon right before this, which is a super simple boss fight, especially in comparison. So I'm really curious how they're going to handle this when it comes to Remake. And when I say I wonder how they're going to handle it is because whenever I think of Demon's Gate in like the Remake setting, I'm picturing them modernizing it and giving it a gimmick similar to Final Fantasy XII with the Demon's Wall. I feel like when we fight Demon's Gate in Remake, it's going to be pursuing us. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. It's a giant wall enemy pursuing towards us, pushing us to the back of the room, and if we don't beat it by a certain time, it's going to crush us. It's a game over. And I think that's going to be a pretty cool boss. So on top of it already being like a strong enemy dealing out high damage, you're kind of on a timer similar to like Bahamut when it comes to Remake. Just count down for Mega Flare. If it hits you, you instantly die. Same thing here. If you don't beat Demon's Wall by a certain time, it's going to crush you against the wall. And then staggering, well, that's important in pretty much every boss fight. In this case, it probably, maybe, potentially, like, actually stagger him where he stops moving, stops pushing forward. So you want to try to hit that stagger bar as often as possible. Next up, we are jumping back a bit to Rocket Town, and I'm talking about, of course, the Palmer fight. This is barely even, it's not even I don't consider it a boss fight, though it qualifies as one. He is technically a boss. It's by no means a hard fight, but this is ultimately only on this video, on this list, because I want to watch this ugly motherfucker get blasted by a Shinra truck in high definition. Next up, we have one of my favorite bosses in all of Final Fantasy VII, and it is, of course, Lost Number within the Shinra Mansion. This is one that I'm very much looking forward to. I'm not sure how they're going to handle it, like a lot of stuff when it comes to Remake, because this was an optional boss, similar to like Midgar Zolom's mostly optional, right, and some other stuff in the game. Like, I'm assuming Vincent's going to be mandatory, but what else within Shinra Manor is going to be mandatory / optional? Because with Vincent, being a mandatory character when it comes to Remake, this is how you get the key to unlock the room in the basement to even talk to Vincent. You have to unlock this safe and fight Lost Number. But with him being a mandatory character, does that make Lost Number not be in the safe? You don't have to get into the safe. Like, that could be a little bit annoying. Maybe you find the key in a different way and they still have Lost Number being entirely optional. The fight itself it's hard if you're not ready for it, because if you don't know the mechanics of Lost Number, whether you got to use physical or magic attacks against him, depending. Like, if you don't know that or understand that, like, it can be a hard fight. But other than that, it's not super, super hard. Like, the fight itself aside, I love the mechanics of, like, how you find the safe combination. What I'm hoping for is that that's still in the game. It still leads to you fighting Lost Number. But I hope that, like, there's some interesting new stuff when it comes to Remake, maybe different kind of ways to find the codes or something. And hopefully the codes are different for not every player, but I hope it's not the same code for everybody. Because when it comes to original FF7, if you walk into the Shinra Mansion and you already know the 4-digit code, you can walk straight up to the safe and do it instantly. To me, that's always been kind of annoying. I don't think I've ever done that on a playthrough. I think I've still always kind of given in to, like, quote-unquote tracking down the codes. But I hope when it comes to like Remake Part 2, like when you start a brand new game, it just auto-generates you a number for the save combination. That way you can just look up online what the code is. You have to go through the steps if you want to fight this optional boss. I think that'd be pretty damn cool. And lastly, of course, for this video, come on, do we even have to say it? We could wrap the video up. You already know who the final boss is going to be. It's, of course, the Soulfire enemy that Gina Tak makes. JK, it's my boy Dyne, of course. This is another boss fight that's not necessarily about the boss fight itself, though it's kind of interesting because it's a boss fight where nobody else helps. Like, Barrett specifically wants to fight Dyne alone, which I think is pretty cool. So that can make it a little bit harder than some other boss fights because you don't have the whole team. You got to focus on Barrett. If you don't have Barrett that leveled up, it can maybe be kind of hard. But it's more so the story here, of course. Like, I've been talking about this forever. Like, this is one of the most anticipated moments of Remake Part 2 for me. How Square Enix decides to handle this segment of the game, this story for Barrett Wallace, is very, very crucial for me. Like, there's part of me that wants it to be beat for beat the exact same. I want to be depressed and sad, and I want to see them go so far as to show us a man kill himself, throw himself off a cliff, and dying from that. But there's also a part of me, and this is a newer development, we'll say, in my crush on Dyne or whatever. I don't know what this is. There's part of me, similar to Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, when I think about it and talk about it, that I would almost like a happy ending for Dyne. It almost be interesting because Remake is a newer story, right? It's something brand new. They're telling their FF7 story in a different way. What if Dyne doesn't die here? What if Dyne gets to reunite with Marlene? Like, there's something here. I don't know that I want it to be different, but if it is different, and he gets to like reunite with his fucking daughter, who he thought was dead this entire time, who he thought Barrett's actions caused the death of his daughter, Think of the heartbreak and turmoil that Dyne's been through, right? Lost his wife Eleanor to like Shinra attacking the town. He thought his daughter Marlene was dead this entire time, and he's been on this revenge mission this whole time. And he gets the revelation after the fight that she's alive. And what if he gets to survive and reunite with his daughter, even if his his hands are stained with blood and he doesn't think he's worthy of Marlene's like affection or love or whatever. Still, like the happy ending for Dyne would be really, really cool if they went that route. Again, I don't know that I want that entirely, but to me, this is the only other option besides the same thing happening as he did in the original game. Either he has to die here, heartbreaking, depressing, rip my heart out of my chest, or he gets to reunite with his daughter. There's no in between. It's one or the other for me. Or maybe, maybe Dyne could join up with the boys, have another gun arm guy on our team. I don't know. But either way, dudes, that is pretty much the video. So when it comes to Remake Part 2, and again, with the comment section, you don't got to be limited to just Disc 1. When it comes to the future Remake games, what are some of the boss fights that you're looking forward to? Because there's obviously plenty more. Like, if we're going beyond Disc 1, outside of the ones I named earlier in the video, like something like the Hojo fight, like, that's one I'm looking forward to a lot. I love the 3 different phases of Hojo. All 3 designs are really, really cool, even though the first one's just regular looking Hojo for the most part. Like, the other phases that it goes through are badass looking. I can't wait to see what those look like in Remake. By the way, dudes, that's the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys already want to see more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DashingDavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane, we in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Obang.